You're holding a knife, but it's made of stone. You don't know what a blade is, not yet. There's no steel, no fire-hardened edge, no concept of metallurgy. But your life depends on cutting something, sinew from bone, bark from tree, meat from hide. The hunt is over, but the real work begins. Your fingers are raw, your tools just rocks. Sharp ones, hopefully. But how do you make sharp? You scan the riverbed. There's something about the way this one fractures, the sound it makes, the shape it leaves behind. And suddenly, for the first time in human history, you invent precision. What you're doing isn't primitive. It's the beginning of all engineering. The world calls them cavemen, but what if they were the original scientists? What if behind every chipped stone lies a forgotten genius? And here's the deeper question. If you lost everything, could you do what they did? You don't think of sharpness as optional. Not here. Not now. It's the difference between meat or no meat, between warmth or frostbite, between staying alive or bleeding out slowly, helplessly because you couldn't cut fast enough. There is no steel in your world, no iron, no bronze, not even the whisper of copper beneath your feet. The idea of metal hasn't been born yet. All you have are your hands, your mind, and the cold silence of stone. And the truth hits hard. If you want to survive, you have to make something sharp from something that doesn't want to be. You don't get a second chance. The animal doesn't pause while you fumble. The cold doesn't stop creeping in because your tool broke. Your children don't get fed because you almost made a blade. Everything, your food, your shelter, your protection, depends on cutting with precision. But nothing in your environment comes ready to do that. You crouch near a riverbank, hands numb from wind and water, scanning the ground. You've picked up dozens of rocks, too soft, too grainy, too brittle. One crumbles in your fingers like dried bread. Another shatters in useless pieces. And then you spot it, a nodule of flint. You don't know its name, but you know how it behaves. You remember how it rings when it's struck just right. You remember the edge it leaves behind, sharper than anything else you've touched. You cradle it carefully like it's alive, because in a way it is. It holds your next breath, your next meal, your next fire. But finding the stone is only the beginning. The rest is risk, violence, precision. You raise another rock, a hammerstone, above it and pause. This moment matters. Too soft and nothing happens. Too hard and the core fractures beyond repair. You're not smashing. You're calculating. You have to strike in a way that breaks the stone into usefulness. The hit lands. A flake shears off, a glimmering shard, thinner than paper, sharper than any modern razor. You hold it up to the light. It could gut a deer. It could pierce hide. It could save a life, or take one. This isn't just a rock. It's your first scalpel. You keep going, flake after flake. Your fingers learn the rhythm, the sound of success, the angle of failure. You become part of a conversation older than language, where geometry is felt, not spoken, and every mistake draws blood. Eventually, your hands are lined with cuts. The stones demand payment, but you don't complain. Pain means you're learning, and you're learning fast, because in this world, ignorance is lethal. No supermarket waits with pre-sliced meat. No warm blanket lies folded on a bed. If you want firewood, you carve it. If you want clothing, you scrape it from hide. If you want food, you skin it fast before the sinews stiffen. Every task is a battle against time and decay, and every battle demands an edge. But something deeper begins to take shape. It's not just survival anymore. It's knowledge. You begin to notice which parts of the stone flake more predictably. You recognize that some rocks strike cleaner than others. Your eyes become tuned to fracture lines, your hands to micro angles. What once seemed like randomness now feels like a design. You aren't just reacting to the world, you're shaping it. This is where technology is born, not in laboratories, but in dirt and blood, in repeated failures and hard-earned insights. You don't have a word for engineer, but you are one. You don't draw blueprints, but your mind holds sequences. Where to strike, how to hold, what to discard. Over time, your blades become better, cleaner, smarter. And then one day, something happens that you didn't expect. You meet someone from another band, another group far from your valley. They hold a tool too, a blade, but it's shaped differently, sharper on one side. Thinner than yours, you trade, you study it. You try to make your own. And just like that, ideas begin to spread faster than fire. This is more than technique. It's a system of thought, a silent form of education passed from hand to hand. Before you ever learn to write, you learn to flake. Before books, before cities, before laws, there was this. The edge comes first. You don't know it yet, but some of the tools you make, some of these crude-looking stones, will survive for hundreds of thousands of years, long after your bones are gone, long after your name is forgotten. Scientists in the far future will study their ridges and patterns and realize something astonishing. You weren't primitive, you were precise. Some of your tools will be sharper than surgical scalpels. Some will be capable of cutting on the microscopic level. And in one case, many millennia later, your techniques will be used to perform actual brain surgery. That's not metaphor, that's archaeology. And it began with this: your bare hands, a flint core, and the relentless need to make something sharp in a world with no safety net. No metal, no help, no forgiveness. Only stone and the mind behind it. And now that you've survived your first blade, a bigger question rises from the edge of the firelight. What makes one stone better than another? Why do some fracture into weapons while others crumble to dust? The stone, it turns out, is not just a tool. It's a language. And you're about to learn how to speak it. You're not picking just any rock. Not anymore. Not after your first blade. You've learned that survival doesn't come from brute force, it comes from attention. You walk differently now, eyes scanning the ground like a reader searching for signs in an ancient script. Only this language isn't made of letters. It's written in fracture lines and mineral patterns. And once you learn to read it, everything changes. Some stones are liars. They seem hard, promising strength, but the moment you strike them, they shatter uselessly, crumbling into powder, offering nothing but frustration. Others resist entirely, refusing to flake or split. They hum with potential energy, but hold it in silence, unwilling to speak. But then there are the others, the rare ones, the stones that seem to want to become tools. You don't know their names, not yet. You've never heard of Flint or Obsidian. You've never used the word chert. But your fingers know the difference. Your eyes catch the subtle shine the way a nodule glints in the morning sun. The texture is smoother. The sound it makes when you tap it clearer like a bell in the fog. When it breaks, it doesn't crumble, it sings. These stones break in curves. Conchoidal fracture, you don't know the term, but you know the pattern, like a shell, a ripple frozen in time. The way glass breaks when it's struck just right. Smooth, predictable, controlled. When you strike these stones, you don't destroy them, you reveal them. It's a conversation now. You realize that the rock isn't just something you shape, it shapes you in return. It teaches you patience. It forces you to slow down and pay attention. You begin to feel the stone's resistance before you strike. You sense which direction it wants to flake. You hesitate a half second before the blow, not out of fear, but out of respect. You are not just using rocks. You're listening to them. And the stones, when chosen wisely, reward you with elegance. Thin flakes spiral off, edges gleaming. You turn them in your hands, marveling at their perfection. Not because they're beautiful, though they are, but because they work. They slice deeper, stay sharp longer. They make your tasks cleaner, safer, faster. There's something quietly miraculous about it. That cold, dead matter can carry intelligence if you know how to unlock it. You begin to notice patterns. Certain riverbeds produce better flakes. Certain hills offer more nappable stone. You share this knowledge in grunts, in gestures, in demonstration, and others begin to understand. Slowly, a mental map forms not of territory but of material quality. You don't just know where food is, you know where the right stone lives. You may not call yourself an expert, but you are. You are a geologist without a name, a material scientist without a lab, an engineer working in pure intuition. You test edges with your thumb, not measurements. You judge fracture angles by feel, not formula. But make no mistake, your mind is running calculations. Over time, something shifts. Your relationship to stone deepens. You begin to anticipate how the core will react. You develop preferences. You know which stones flake sharper but dull faster, like obsidian, razor-thin, fragile brilliance, or which hold an edge longer, like flint, harder, sturdier. You balance sharpness with durability, fragility with function. This is engineering. Not the kind with textbooks and equations, but the kind that matters. The kind that keeps children warm at night and lets old hunters return home alive. The kind that builds a civilization, not with concrete, but with the invisible thread of technique passed through generations. Because stone is unforgiving, but once you learn its language, it opens doors, and not just for blades. Scrapers for hides, burins for engraving, awls for piercing, points for hunting, cores for carrying, because sometimes the flakes themselves are the tool. Each has a shape, a purpose, and you begin to see them before they exist, visualizing the flakes inside the rock like a sculptor seeing form inside marble. You aren't just breaking rocks anymore. You're extracting ideas from them. This is more than survival. This is technology born in silence, shaped by pressure. And in this way, you are closer to the engineers of the future than you realize. When a modern metallurgist tests alloys, when a blacksmith forges steel, when a designer adjusts a microchip's layout, they are all doing what you're doing now. Listening to materials, understanding what they want to be, finding the limits, and then finding the edge just before it breaks. The world you live in doesn't reward theory. It rewards intuition, experience, and failure. But through those things, you build a kind of fluency, not just in stone, but in matter itself. You come to understand something profound. Nature isn't random. It whispers its logic through structure, and the best tools are made by those who know how to listen. So you keep walking, keep testing. You lift a new stone, feel its weight, tap it gently against your knuckle. It sings, you smile, you don't need a name for it. You already know what it can become. And as your understanding deepens, you begin to wonder, is this where intelligence starts? Not in words, but in choices, in knowing which rock matters. Because one small decision, to pick this stone over that one, might determine whether your fire burns tonight or your story ends cold and forgotten. But you've learned to listen, and the stone in your hand is ready to answer. You sit cross-legged on the earth, surrounded by the silence of your own intent. A stone rests in your lap, your core. Another, round and weighty, fits snugly in your palm, your hammerstone. But this isn't smashing. This isn't brute destruction. This is the slow unfolding of control. And every hit is a question: will you create or will you destroy? The first blows are cautious. You hesitate, you adjust. The stone is unyielding, stubborn, until suddenly it is. A flake shears off with a whispering snap, leaving behind a gleaming edge. You run your thumb along it, blood rising from the touch. It's sharper than anything alive should be. A sliver of moonlight born from pressure. You didn't invent Flint knapping. No one here has ever called it that. There is no name for what you're doing, only the doing itself. But you're part of a tradition that stretches backward so far it loops beyond memory. These techniques were passed not through speech but through demonstration, through mistakes, through scars. And now the knowledge lives in your fingers. Each strike matters. Force, angle, rhythm, nothing can be guessed. Too shallow and the flake won't detach. Too deep and the core shatters, ruined. You begin to realize you're not breaking the stone. You're finding the break it already wants to make. There's something elegant in that. You're cooperating with the rock, not forcing it, not commanding, just listening and responding with precision. Like playing an instrument with no sound, where the melody is the shape of an edge. The flakes begin to pile up beside you. Each one is a lesson. Some are perfect, glinting with curved ridges and biting sharpness. Others are failures, bruised edges, wasted potential. You examine them all. You learn. Over time, your hands stop shaking. Your breath becomes steady. Your mind clears. This is thinking in its oldest form. You're not holding an abstract concept in your head. You're holding it in your hands. Geometry, tension, force, you don't measure them. You feel them. Not with numbers, but with nerve endings and repetition. The core becomes your chalkboard. The flakes are your notes. And every successful strike is a sentence in a wordless language of logic and outcome. There's no blueprint, no teacher, just stone, mistakes, and memory, but that's enough. Because every time you flake a tool, you're not just shaping a blade, you're shaping a brain, your brain. Over thousands of strikes, your neural pathways adapt. You become more precise, more predictive. You see the shape before it forms. You visualize the next flake while holding the last. In a world without writing, this is your first form of recorded knowledge, held not in symbols, but in scars on stone. And there's something else happening too, something harder to name. The act of napping becomes meditative. Your body moves with rhythm. Your mind slips into a flow state, not asleep, not fully awake. You aren't thinking exactly. You are the thinking. When others watch you, they see magic. The way the stone breaks so cleanly, the way you coax it into form. They bring you more cores, more hammerstones, ask to see your technique. You show them. You laugh when they get it wrong. You nod when they get it right. And slowly the craft spreads. You begin to see tools you didn't make, made in your style. You see others improve on your ideas. You learn from them in return. The group becomes smarter than any one person, not because of language, but because of tools. Because shaping stone demands mental effort, and shared effort multiplies insight. This is what it means to build a culture, not with laws or rituals, but with repetition, with coordination, with hands copying what eyes have seen. You may never draw a diagram. You may never write a formula, but you will pass down the rhythm of angles through generations. And this rhythm, this method of shaping through breaking, will last longer than any song or story. It will endure in the archaeological record, in the patterns of flake scars, in the way certain edges repeat over millennia. You begin to recognize something that shakes you, the idea that breaking can be building. That destruction, when done carefully with thought, can give rise to function. You no longer fear the crack or the fracture. You welcome it. You begin to aim for it. Because the only way to free the edge is to fracture the whole. You realize this is the mind's first great metaphor. That order can come from the intentional act of breaking. That improvement comes not from perfection, but from process. The shattered core beside you isn't a mistake. It's a teacher. And the tools in your hands, knives, scrapers, points, are not just weapons. They're extensions of thinking. Proof that cognition lives not only in the skull but in the feedback between hand and stone. So you keep striking, keep learning, keep building by breaking. Because you're not just making tools. You're laying the groundwork for invention itself. And far off, just past the edge of your next flake, a new idea begins to glimmer. What if tools didn't just shape the world? What if they could shape you? Your fingerprints are no longer smooth. They're a roadmap of fine cuts and faded scars, the quiet history of every mistake you've made and every edge you've created. You don't notice the blood anymore, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've learned to expect it. Pain is part of the craft now. It speaks in pulses and stings, guiding you away from sloppy angles, from lazy grips. Your skin thickens, but not into numbness. It thickens into awareness. You begin to move differently. Your hands, once clumsy, once unsure, have become something else entirely. They are no longer just parts of you. They are instruments. And with them, you are learning to coax complexity from chaos. You're not just holding the hammer stone. You are calibrating it without thinking, without measuring. Every muscle remembers. The way you cradle the core, shift your weight, tilt your wrist, it's all reflex now, built from hundreds of hours of trying and failing, shaping and reshaping. Precision doesn't come from thought anymore. It comes from feel. This isn't brute strength. You've seen what brute strength does. It cracks, it ruins, it wastes. The real power is subtle. It's in the tiny adjustments your fingers make in the space between breath and strike. It's in the gentle rotation of your wrist just before contact. It's in the stillness, the pause, the micro-calculations that no one else sees. You're not forging swords or hammering metal in a furnace. You are practicing artisanal technology before the word artisan has ever been spoken, before words at all, really. What you do predates language, and yet it is as refined as any modern craft. This is the paradox you live inside. Your tools are primitive, but your technique is sophisticated. You may not understand metallurgy, but you understand tension. You may not know math, but you know ratios, how the size of a flake affects its strength, how the curve of a blade controls its cut. Your hands learn what the mind can't yet explain. And the consequences of a misstep are real. There are no safety gloves, no protective goggles, no margin for error. The same stone that gives you a cutting edge can just as easily take a piece of your hand. You work with respect now, not fear, not recklessness, but a quiet, reverent precision. Others begin to notice. They see the fluidity in your movements, the confidence. They hand you tools to inspect, ask for advice without words. In their eyes, you're not just a tool maker, you're something more, a kind of translator, someone who speaks the secret dialect between skin and stone. You look at your hands and realize, these are not the hands of a hunter or a gatherer. These are the hands of a maker. They are stained with ash and marrow, calloused, cracked, often sore. But they are evolving not just physically but cognitively. Every fine motor skill you develop rewires your brain. Every edge you flake, every point you pressure, strengthens the connection between mind and body. And this changes everything. Because when your hands can make what your imagination sees, a doorway opens, one that no other animal has walked through, not just using tools but creating them, innovating, refining, passing on a technique not as instinct but as culture. You start to teach what you've learned not with speech but with gesture, with demonstration. You guide someone's fingers, adjust their grip, correct their angle. They nod. They try again. When they get it right, the look on their face is familiar. You've worn it yourself, the awe of having made something sharp, useful, enduring. And so the knowledge spreads hand to hand, scar to scar. Soon you see variations. Someone modifies your grip. Someone else discovers a better percussion angle. You borrow their idea, they borrow yours, and the collective grows smarter, more skilled, more precise. Technology here isn't made in isolation. It's made through hands in motion, through repetition, imitation, and iteration, through a feedback loop of touch and outcome. And over time, your community changes subtly but unmistakably. You spend less time chasing game and more time perfecting the tools that bring the game down faster. You don't just survive, you optimize, you adapt. You learn how to make better scrapers for hides, finer points for hunting, more durable cores to carry flake potential over long distances. All of it through your hands. It's easy to forget how rare this ability to hold an idea quite literally in your grip, to make your thoughts physical. You are not just shaping stone, you are shaping possibility. And as the sun dips lower and the cold air creeps in, you sit by the fire, sore and exhausted. You flex your fingers. They ache, every joint, every tendon. But the ache is satisfying, earned. You look at the flake you finished just moments ago. Clean, elegant, dangerous. You look at your hands, torn and weathered, and you realize something quietly profound. This pain, this precision, this persistence. This is what separates you from the animals that run and hide and feed and die. Not your strength, not your speed, but your capacity to make. To use your hands not just to grasp, but to create. Not just to hold the world, but to change it. And tomorrow, when the pain fades and the morning returns, you'll do it again. Because these hands, your hands, remember the edge. And they are not finished speaking. You don't know what a platform angle is. You've never heard of fracture mechanics, leverage ratios, or Hertzian cones. There are no symbols, no formulas, no equations to reference. But somehow, without math, without language, without abstraction, you've begun to master all of it. You don't calculate, you feel. When your hammerstone meets the core, the strike isn't random. It's precise. It lands at a place your eyes barely see but your body understands. Not too steep, not too shallow. Just enough to send a flake sliding off the surface in a smooth, predictable fracture, like cracking ice, like peeling bark, like the world agreeing with your hands for a fleeting second. You didn't read this in a book. You learned it from failure, from stone that refused to split, from edges that crumbled into useless grit. But every mistake taught you something. Every shattered core whispered a principle. You've started to see patterns. They repeat, not always, not perfectly, but often enough to make you wonder. That when the angle is too steep, the blow rebounds. When the angle is too shallow, the flake skids off, worthless. But in between, there's a sweet spot, a sacred tilt, a line hidden in the stone waiting for you to find it. And once you find it, the stone yields like it wants to break for you. That's when you realize your hands have been solving geometry problems long before you knew what geometry was. Every tool you shape is a sculpture in logic. Every flake you remove is a calculation in tension and fracture. And the core, when you hold it just right, is a three-dimensional equation waiting to be solved by instinct. You start recognizing sequences, not numbers, not scripts, but orders. First this flake, then that one. You reduce from one side, then flip, then strike again. You've never heard the phrase bifacial reduction, but that's what you're doing. You're removing flakes in a rhythm, spiraling inward, chasing symmetry. And you're not alone. Others have discovered these invisible rules too, maybe not in the same way, maybe not at the same speed, but their cores bear familiar scars. You look at their work and see echoes of your own. It's like the stones themselves have rules, and the people who survive long enough begin to uncover them. Not because of intellect, but because of necessity. The geometry you practice isn't academic, it's existential. If you misjudge a strike, your spear tip breaks in the middle of the hunt. If your scraper is dull, you waste time you can't afford preparing hides that will rot in the sun. So you learn the rules not in school, but in consequence. The symmetry matters, the sharpness matters, but so does the sequence. You begin to notice as certain flakes unlock other flakes. Certain removals open new surfaces. There's a flow to it, a choreography. And the more you listen, the more you stop fighting the stone and start cooperating with it. You're not forcing form onto matter. You're negotiating. You glance at a pile of flakes beside you, their edges catching the light. You didn't just break these from the core. You freed them one by one from within a pattern your body could feel but your mind hadn't yet named. There's elegance in that. Precision born without precision instruments. Order without symbols. Intelligence without instruction. This is pre-language engineering, pre-numeric logic, and yet it's no less real than the mathematics future scientists will use to study the same flakes you now hold. They'll talk about striking platforms, about optimal percussion angles, about fracture propagation. They'll model it with computers and explain what you never put into words. But you don't need words. You already know. Because your brain, the same brain that once only hunted, only fled, only fed, has evolved to recognize geometry by touch, to intuit structure, even when it can't articulate it. You look around and realize there are no straight lines in nature, no perfect circles, but in your tools those shapes emerge, edges that follow arcs, points that follow vectors. Each tool you create is a diagram written in stone, and the design is born not of imagination alone, but of interaction. Between hand and rock, between failure and refinement, between randomness and pattern. And over time, those patterns begin to settle into memory. Not your memory, cultural memory. Someone watches you nap, they try it, they struggle, but they see the sequence and eventually they learn. That learning spreads, techniques evolve, styles form, communities begin to favor certain angles, certain forms, certain proportions. You are creating more than tools. You are creating systems. And systems outlast individuals. Soon, others will carry these methods to distant valleys, distant rivers. The shapes you've discovered will migrate, not because you carved them into cave walls, but because they work. Because sacred geometry, even unspoken, demands to be preserved. And as the sun warms the stone in your hand, you stare at the next core. You turn it in your fingers, inspecting ridges, angles, possibilities. You don't see just a rock anymore. You see potential. You feel the slope. You feel the weight. You feel the future edge hiding inside the surface, just waiting for the right sequence to reveal it. And without a word, without a plan, you raise your hammerstone once more. Because the geometry is calling, and your hands are ready to answer. You've seen sharp, flint, charred, bone, edges that slice hide, that shear tendon, that open the body and the world alike. But this is something different. You crouch by a place where the earth has cracked open, where ancient heat once surged and cooled into silence. What you find there doesn't look like a stone. It looks like darkness itself, solidified. Smooth, glossy, black as night, and when the light hits just right, it gleams like water turned to fire. Obsidian. You don't know the word, but the material speaks for itself. Even before you strike it, you sense something volatile, something alive in its stillness. And then, with one clean blow, it fractures. Not like flint, not like anything you've worked before. The flake peels away in a whisper. The edge it leaves behind is terrifying, too fine to see clearly, too clean to feel without bleeding. It's not sharp in the way other tools are sharp. It's dangerous in a different register, like light sharpened to a blade. You test it cautiously, not out of fear but reverence. A feather touch against hide, it parts effortlessly. A gesture and the world opens. Meat slices with no resistance. Skin separates without tearing. This isn't just a tool. This is a scalpel. And you, kneeling in the dust with blood on your hands, are no longer just a tool maker. You've become something else. A surgeon. No, you don't know anatomy. You don't know names for organs or layers of tissue. But you know how to remove an arrowhead from beneath skin without butchering the flesh around it. You know how to scrape a wound clean with minimal trauma. You know how to cut with such precision that healing becomes possible. This black glass isn't just reshaping your tools, it's reshaping your role. You've seen bones with holes drilled perfectly round trepanation, the future will call it. Skulls that survived surgery long before surgery had a name. And now, holding this edge in your hand, you start to understand how. Because with obsidian, the cut is so clean the body barely fights it. There's no crushing, no tearing, just parting. It leaves wounds that bleed less, that close faster, that almost seem respectful. And still, thousands of years from now, long after your name is lost and your tools buried, obsidian will not be forgotten. Even in 2025, surgeons in controlled environments with sterile gloves and electric lights will sometimes return to this ancient blade. Not out of nostalgia, but because steel can't compete with what nature made perfect long ago. The modern world will measure the sharpness of an obsidian edge at 3 nanometers, 3 billionths of a meter. That's 30 times sharper than a high-end surgical scalpel. So sharp, it can split individual cells cleanly in half. And yet here you are barefoot, language still primitive, and you've already found it. You've already mastered it. No microscopes, no laboratories, just touch, instinct, and trust in your own eyes. What does that say about you? What does that say about the people we call primitive? Maybe it's not that you lacked precision. Maybe it's that our modern assumptions lack perspective. Because you didn't stumble into this. You selected the obsidian. You tested its fracture. You adjusted your strike. You chose the flake that offered control over chaos. You sharpened not by luck but by understanding. And more than that, you adapted. You didn't just discover a sharper material. You created a new technique to match it, a lighter touch, a steadier hand, a deeper knowledge of how stone becomes an extension of flesh. You've evolved your tools, but more importantly, you've evolved yourself. So when someone limps to you with a wound, or a tooth to be pulled, or bone that must be cleaned of rot, you don't reach for brute force. You reach for the blade that makes your fingers more than fingers. That makes your intention more than guesswork. You reach for the sharpest edge on earth. And in that moment, eyes focused, hands steady, you realize something deeply unsettling. You may be called a caveman, But what you hold in your hand is more advanced than what many modern surgeons trust today. And suddenly, the distance between past and future collapses. Because maybe civilization isn't measured in years. Maybe it's measured in edges. And obsidian, black glass born from fire, is the sharpest memory the earth has ever left us. And you're the one who learned how to listen. It doesn't look like much at first. Just a piece of stone shaped, yes, but simple. No moving parts, no wires, no decoration. And yet when you wrap your fingers around it, it feels right. Too right. The weight, the balance, the curve of it, it sits in your palm like it was made not just by a hand, but for a hand. This isn't a chunk of rock. It's something far stranger. It's an Acheulean hand axe. And you're not the first to hold one. Not by hundreds, not by thousands, by millions. Across 1.5 million years, people like you shaped this form again and again, almost identically, from the savannas of Africa to the river valleys of Europe to the plains of Asia. A design so universal, so persistent, it outlasted whole species. It spread without being reinvented, without language, without blueprint, without ever being improved. You start to wonder, who made the first one? Was it discovery, accident, genius? You imagine a figure long before fire, before words, before modern thought striking stone against stone and noticing something different. A flake not just sharp but useful. A core not just broken but symmetrical. And in that symmetry, a pattern. And in that pattern, repetition, ritual, meaning. Because these weren't hacked together in a hurry. They were crafted. You see the double faces, skillfully reduced on both sides. The sharp perimeter running the length of the tool like the edge of a teardrop. You see the intention, the same logic of geometry, the same choreography of strikes you've learned to feel expressed with patience and purpose. But it's more than that. The Acheulean hand axe isn't just functional. It's elegant, often too symmetrical to be strictly practical. Some are so refined, their balance is closer to art than survival. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Was this always a tool? Or was it something more? Maybe it began as utility, a butchering tool, a digging wedge, a general-purpose blade. But if that were all, why did its form become so standardized? Why did it last so long without change? And why do some seem never to have been used at all? You feel it, a whisper of culture beneath the surface, something deeper than mere function. Maybe it was a symbol, a sign of skill or readiness or status, a message passed not in words but in shape. I can make this. I know the sequence. I belong. Or maybe it was memory, a design passed down like a story, repeated because it worked. And because, in a world without writing, the only way to keep a good idea alive was to make it again and again. But then, why didn't it evolve? For over 1 million years, this form remained almost untouched. Empires in the modern world don't last 1/100th that long. Tools today become obsolete in months. But the hand axe, this single, iconic shape, endured through ice ages, migrations, and extinction events. And here you are holding one now, not a replica, not a copy, but the real thing, the same shape your ancestors knew, the same design their hands once memorized. You feel them behind you, not just one person, but generations, makers who lived and died by this edge, who taught their children to find the right stone, to strike at the right angle, to see the form inside the formless. No language, no books, just transmission through practice, through presence, through the sound of stone on stone again and again over centuries. It's humbling, because the hand axe doesn't just cut meat, it cuts through time, through your assumptions about what it means to be intelligent, to be creative, to be human. We once believed these tools were crude, simple extensions of instinct, but the more we study them, the more we see intention, consistency, precision, even aesthetics. Some archaeologists have argued these axes are too perfect, that they may have held spiritual or symbolic weight, that they might be among the first human icons. Not just for use, but for meaning. And if that's true, if these tools held emotional or social power, then you're not just holding a knife. You're holding a story, one that was told not with words but with edges, one that shaped how our ancestors saw themselves and how they shaped the world. Because this isn't just about survival, it's about identity. The Acheulean hand axe is, in some ways, the first object that asks a question. What does it mean to make something beautiful, even when you don't have to? And maybe that question is what kept it alive for so long. Maybe it echoed in every flake removed, every symmetry pursued, every moment someone held one and felt that ancient, almost mathematical balance. You turn the hand axe over in your palm one more time. It's cold, heavy, sharp. It could butcher an animal. It could split a root. It could sit untouched in the ashes of a hearth, a quiet symbol of knowing. But most of all, it reminds you. The past isn't primitive. It's layered. And sometimes, what looks like a rock in the dirt is the fingerprint of thought. You strike the core again and the flake falls wrong, too thick. The edge is dull. You toss it aside, not in frustration but in understanding. That piece just taught you something. You don't have words for it, not yet. No diagrams, no metallurgy. But in your own way, you're performing an experiment and you don't even realize how revolutionary that is. Because the truth is, you're not just breaking stone, you're learning from it. Every blow you deliver holds a question. Every flake you remove contains the seed of an answer. And in that slow, quiet rhythm of trial and error, something else is emerging, not a tool, not a weapon, but a pattern of thinking. You're not copying what you saw. You're modifying. You're tinkering. You're solving problems not just with instinct, but with foresight. And that changes everything. You begin to notice how a steeper angle chips differently than a shallow one. You recognize that a longer edge dulls faster unless the curve supports it. You see the way a striking platform can make or break a blade's potential. These aren't guesses. They're observations. The beginning of feedback loops, of logic, of cause and effect stitched into the muscle memory of your hands. That's not just survival, that's engineering. Because a chimpanzee can strip a twig to fish termites and a crow can bend a wire to hook food, but they stop there. The innovation ends. The tool is specific, temporary. It dies with the problem. But you keep going. You hit the same stone 20 different ways. You test edge retention over time. You compare cutting angles, play with thickness, adjust your strike based on the sound the rock makes. You refine your hand positions. Your grip tightens at just the right moment. You rotate the core before each blow, rotating ideas in your head even faster. You're not just shaping stone anymore. You're shaping possibility. And the line between instinct and thought is starting to blur. Because you don't need to be told how to do this. You feel it. Your brain runs silent calculations. Muscle, pressure, angle, velocity, 1,000 data points processed beneath awareness. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's the early architecture of cognition, a scaffolding that's built not in language but in action. And like any good engineer, you keep a mental record. You remember the core that split clean after the fourth blow, the flake that sliced deeper when it curved slightly inward. You remember failures too, the shatter that cost you a day's effort, the brittle edge that chipped away with use. And these failures become your tutors, patient, brutal, unforgettable. One mistake can mean hunger, or infection, or worse. So you learn fast, you learn forward. Others begin to notice. They mimic your strikes. They ask in their own quiet way how you did it. Maybe they offer a new twist in return. And now something else is born, not just tools, but teaching, shared refinement, culture as iteration. You watch someone else shape a point faster than you ever could, and instead of envy, you feel curiosity. You study their sequence. You borrow it, improve it, pass it on. This is not mimicry. This is design. And with it comes a kind of power that no animal before you has held. The power to make mistakes on purpose, to test bad ideas just to find better ones, to throw away the useful in pursuit of the optimal. That's not instinct. That's strategy. You begin to think ahead of the tool. What if this edge held longer? What if I could cut deeper without snapping the flake? What if I shaped it not for my hand, but for someone smaller, a child maybe? These aren't survival questions. These are design problems, and with them, thought itself evolves. Even without language, you're building systems. You return to the same type of rock. You choose hammerstones of specific sizes. You develop a rhythm not just for function, but for consistency. In time, these patterns will be recognized as production methods, the ancestors of standardization, of assembly, of planned complexity. You aren't building one knife, you're building a process. And from that process comes insight. Not verbal insight, but something older, more primal. The slow-blooming realization that the world is not static, that it can be modified, improved, controlled. That knowledge will split everything open. Because once you realize you can shape stone, you begin to wonder what else can be shaped. Wood, bone, fire. Thought, memory, time. You don't know the word experiment. You don't need it. Your entire day is one. You push the edge further, literally, figuratively. You design points that pierce deeper for hunting, blades that slice cleaner for skinning, scrapers that conserve your energy and time. Every choice you make ripples outward. A better tool means better food. Better food means more strength, More strength means more survival. More survival means more time to think. It's recursive. Your tools buy you the space to make better tools. And that feedback loop, that elegant engine of innovation, is the quiet miracle of your life. You don't stand back and marvel at what you've done. You don't declare the age of reason. But somewhere inside, something shifts. Something new and electric stirs at the base of your skull. A realization as sharp and quiet as the blade in your hand. You are not simply surviving anymore. You are designing your future. And all of it, began with a stone and a question. What happens if I strike it just a little differently this time? You don't notice the eyes at first. You're focused, flint in one hand, hammerstone in the other, working through the familiar rhythm. Strike, rotate, examine, strike again. But then you feel it, a presence. Still, quiet, watching. It's a child. Not yours, not yet. Just one of the small ones. Barefoot, wide-eyed, crouching nearby. No words pass between you, there aren't any yet, but you see the questions in their posture. You remember being like that not long ago. Watching someone older shape the stone, marveling at how a raw, jagged lump turned into something precise, even elegant. So you slow your pace just slightly. You let the child see your hands. You tilt the stone in the light, angle your next strike so they can follow. The flake falls clean. It makes that sound, a bright snap that always feels like magic. The child flinches, then smiles. And just like that, something changes. Because you are not alone anymore in this thinking. This is no longer just your tool. It's no longer just your innovation, your edge, your method of survival. Someone else is learning it, not by accident, not by instinct, but by watching. And watching is everything. Because with no language to carry your knowledge, the only way it moves forward is through imitation and repetition. Each strike becomes a sentence. Each gesture, a kind of grammar. The rhythm of your hands is the first lecture hall. The sound of flint breaking becomes the first book. You don't teach the way modern people do. There are no lessons, no instructions, but there is patience, demonstration, a kind of ancestral generosity. You slow down so someone else can speed up. You repeat your mistake so they can watch you fix it. That's not instinct. That's intention. And in that moment, that quiet transfer of knowledge, a new force is born. Culture. It's invisible, weightless, but it moves like fire. One child learns, then shows another. A tool perfected in your hands is now duplicated across the fire pit. Variations emerge, a new curve here, a thicker edge there. You watch others try your rhythm, then refine it. And for the first time, improvement doesn't die with the innovator. It spreads. You've started something contagious. And the effect is profound. Because now tools are no longer just tools. They are information. A chipped stone becomes a record of technique. A scraper shape tells a story of who made it, how they thought, what they valued. You can pick up a tool you didn't make and feel the logic behind it, as if reading a sentence carved into its edge. These aren't just objects. They are ideas, portable, replicable, adaptable. Technology becomes memory, and memory becomes inheritance. That inheritance grows. Over time, certain shapes take on shared meaning. You and others begin crafting similar tools without ever agreeing to do so. It's just what's done. A hand axe isn't simply useful, it's understood. A passed-down tradition that binds you to those around you and to those who came before. Culture is no longer a result of intelligence. It's a driver of it. Because now, intelligence isn't limited to one brain. It's pooled, distributed, amplified. You're no longer learning everything from scratch. You're building on the work of others, stacking insight on insight. A child doesn't start from nothing, they start from you. And you didn't start from nothing either. You started from hands long gone, who left behind edges and cores and flakes like stepping stones. What begins as an act of survival becomes a system of meaning. Soon, your group doesn't just use tools, it recognizes them. Each shape carries social memory. A well-made blade might signal respect. A unique design might spark imitation. Slowly, the way you shape a stone becomes part of who you are. Technology isn't just survival now, it's identity. And with identity comes belonging. Those who know the rhythm, the sequence of blows, the choice of stone, the hidden patterns are trusted. Those who learn slowly are helped. Those who refuse are left behind. A subtle hierarchy begins to form, not of dominance but of understanding. This is how culture shapes minds. Because once knowledge spreads, the brain adapts to carry more of it. Neurons fire faster. Memory deepens. Patterns emerge more easily. Your children grow up with more efficient tools, so they learn to build even better ones. And the spiral tightens, skill drives knowledge, knowledge drives communication, and communication becomes the first echo of language. You don't speak yet, not in the way modern humans do, but you gesture more deliberately, you grunt with nuance, you begin to layer meaning into sound, and over time those sounds evolve into shared signals, into proto-words, into stories told by firelight, not yet in sentences, but in symbols, mimicry, rhythm. And what are stories, if not tools of their own? Tools to remember, to warn, to imagine. You sharpen your blades, yes, but now you also sharpen minds. The edge is no longer only on the stone. It's in the thoughts behind it, in the patterns passed down not by genes but by practice. Culture is now your species' most powerful weapon, more than muscle, more than fire, more than fang or claw. And you didn't plan this. You didn't set out to create culture. You just struck a stone and let someone watch. That was enough. And even now, thousands of generations later, in a world of satellites and algorithms, you're still doing the same thing. Watching, learning, passing knowledge hand to hand, mind to mind. The first edge was made of flint. The next one was made of memory. You begin to realize something unexpected. Not every sharp edge is the same. Some are cleaner, some last longer, some seem to glide through sinew like breath through frost. But more than that, some just look right, balanced, symmetrical, almost beautiful. And now, the way you shape your tools starts to matter in a new way, not just for function, but for form. You don't have words for this shift. No one gathers around and announces it. But your hands start making different decisions. You grip the flint more carefully. You hold the antler tine, a new tool, born from bone, and instead of striking, you press. Not hard, not all at once, it's controlled, quiet. You angle the antler tip against the stone's edge, find just the right tension and push. A whisper of a flake peels off the surface, thin as bark, light as ash. Another, then another. You're no longer breaking stone, you're coaxing it, carving it, refining it. This is pressure flaking. A technique no one told you existed, but that your hands seem to discover on their own. You realize you can shape blades not just broadly but finely. Instead of crude angles, you carve in delicate serrations. You form barbs. You taper points. You design. The blade is no longer a blunt extension of force, it's a surgical instrument. A scalpel before there were surgeries. A needle before thread. And this precision does something to your mind. Because when you press, you have to slow down, you have to feel. Every movement counts. Every fraction of an angle changes the outcome. It's not like the rhythmic percussion of Flint knapping. It's not about rhythm at all. It's about restraint, focus, vision. And from that restraint, something extraordinary emerges. Your blades begin to look intentional, elegant, symmetrical in ways that go beyond survival. Others notice. They turn your blades in the firelight, tracing the edges with awe, not just for sharpness, for shape. A line has blurred. You're not just making tools anymore. You're making art. And that changes everything. Because when you step into the space between function and beauty, something ancient awakens in you, something even more human than hunger or fear. The urge to make something good, even when good is hard to define. You feel it in your fingertips, the silent satisfaction of a clean flake, a perfect curve, a balanced point. You find yourself remaking pieces that already work not because they're broken, but because they could be better. Why? Because now the blade isn't just a blade, it's a signal. A message from your mind to another's. I was here. I shaped this. I understood something about the world and I left it behind in stone. There's no language yet, but there's communication. And that blade, narrow, sharp, finely flaked, says more than 1,000 grunts could. It says you cared about the edge, about the process, about the craft. It says you could see what wasn't yet there and bring it into being. Isn't that art? Others begin to imitate your style, not just your techniques, your aesthetic. Some even copy flaws, not realizing they were mistakes. You start to recognize regional styles, slightly different curves, preferred materials, tastes. Pressure flaking becomes a cultural fingerprint, an early signature. And that signature spreads farther than you ever will. Because pressure-flaked tools travel. They're carried on hunts, given in trade, passed between groups. One day someone holds your blade, someone who's never met you, who never will. And yet they see what you saw. They feel the intelligence in the edge, the harmony in the flake scars. They recognize the same patterns. And maybe for a moment they wonder who made it. They wonder about you. And now you wonder something else. When did this shift happen? When did stone shaping become more than survival? Was it when you made the first pressure flake? When you smoothed the ridgeline just for the feel of it? Or was it earlier, in the longing to improve, to express, to leave a mark? Because this isn't just about tools anymore. It's about meaning. Pressure flaking creates more than sharper points, it creates depth. It invites judgment, pride, even competition. Your best blade becomes more than a tool, it becomes a challenge. Can someone make one better, cleaner, more beautiful? And somewhere deep in that quiet challenge, art is born. Not in paintings or sculptures, not yet, but in edges, in symmetry, in the geometry of decisions made without numbers. You don't know the word artist, but you live it. Every time you press down on that antler tip, every time you release a flake just so, every time you step back and feel that rush of silent accomplishment. This isn't just the edge of survival anymore. It's the edge of expression. And in a world of cold stone, roaring wind, and aching need, that expression becomes something sacred, something rare, something worth passing on. Your blade gleams in the firelight. And deep down, you understand, the sharpest thing you've made tonight isn't the edge. It's the idea behind it. It begins with a sharp edge. But you don't stop at the edge. You want reach. You want force. You want power that extends beyond your arms, beyond your fear. So you bind your blade to a stick. You lash it with sinew, wedge it into split wood, seal it with resin. Now the edge doesn't just cut, it pierces from afar. The spear is born, and with it, something shifts inside you. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thinking ahead. The spear changes everything. Not because it's deadly, though it is, but because it requires you to imagine something that doesn't exist yet. A future moment, a strike not yet taken, an animal not yet fallen. You don't just react to the world now. You shape it. You set traps, plan ambushes, signal others. You start using the terrain, the wind, even the shadows. You learn that a good weapon is only as powerful as the mind behind it. You begin to see prey not as distant luck but as a solvable problem. A group of mammoths, massive, terrifying, can now be split and flanked. You coordinate silently. One of you drives, one cuts off escape, one waits perfectly still for the fatal opening. The kill is no longer just strength and luck, it's pattern recognition, timing, memory, and trust. Because now, your survival depends on others. You don't hurl your spear alone. You act as a pack, a system, every member a limb of a single thinking organism. The spear becomes the thread that binds that system together, a shared risk, a shared edge. Suddenly, intelligence isn't just in your brain, it's in the network. And that intelligence is evolving fast. You test different shaft lengths, different stone points. Some spears fly farther, others strike deeper. You learn balance not just of the object but of trade-offs. A heavier point means more force but less control. A thinner one might shatter but penetrate armor like hide. With every hunt you adjust. With every failure you refine. You're not just wielding weapons. You're prototyping them. In time, you realize a deeper pattern. The sharper the blade, the greater the distance it allows. And the more distance you create between yourself and danger, the more margin you gain for strategy, for learning, for survival itself. The stone point gives you seconds. The spear gives you meters. Later, the atlatl, a spear thrower, will give you yards. That reach is more than physical. It's cognitive. It's dominance through abstraction. The animal you kill may be bigger, faster, stronger, but it doesn't know it's being stalked. It doesn't anticipate your angles, your formations, your traps. You see the invisible lines of a battlefield before they exist. And that foresight, that chilling, calculating distance, becomes your deadliest edge. But there's something else the spear changes. It changes fear. Because now you're not always prey. Now you're a threat. Other species begin to move differently around you. They sense your formations, smell your intentions. You become an apex predator not by brute force but by collective memory and design. And soon, you're not just using weapons against animals. You begin to use them against each other. Territory, mates, resources, status. Now the edge cuts both ways. Spears are carried not just for hunting, but for signaling, for power, for warning. A well-made point says, "I know how to kill." Your weapons become identity, protection, deterrence. And with them comes a chilling possibility. That intelligence, when sharpened enough, becomes violence. It's not just what you hunt. It's who you fear. And suddenly, the line between survival and domination becomes thin, sharp as the tip of your spear. But in that tension, something deeper emerges. Your weapons force you to negotiate with animals, with terrain, with rivals, even with your own kind, because now mistakes aren't just painful, they're lethal. You begin to resolve conflict with shows of strength, not bloodshed. You display your weapons, brandish them, sharpen them obsessively, but you don't always use them. Because now, everyone knows what they can do. A new kind of intelligence is taking root, one that values foresight, caution, leverage. Not just brute aggression, but social calculation. And the tools that made this possible, the blades, the spears, the throwers, they weren't accidents. They were extensions of your nervous system, your imagination. They were externalized thought, hardened into stone and wood. You didn't just invent weapons. You invented projected intention. Now you walk with a spear not just to survive, but to be understood. To be seen as capable, dangerous, aware. And that quiet awareness, that the mind can move faster than the body, farther than the arm, deeper than the cut, that is the beginning of something unstoppable. You've weaponized intelligence. And now, for the first time in history, thought itself has teeth. And it only gets sharper from here. You don't write things down. There's no paper, no symbols, no words, but you remember. You remember the slope of that cliff where the stone breaks clean. You remember the color of the good rock, not too pale, not too grainy. You remember the sound a flake makes when it fractures just right, that satisfying tink, not too sharp, not too dull. Your hands recall the rhythm. Your eyes search for that glint, that angle. Your body is a vessel of memory. And memory is everything. Without it, you waste hours with the wrong stone. You break cores into useless chunks. You dull your edge and dull your chances. But with memory, you return to the right place. You skip the first dozen mistakes. You start from what worked. Slowly, something new begins to take shape inside your brain, not just instinct, but a kind of structured recollection. A memory system built for tools. You start to see memory differently. It's not just about events or people, it's about processes, sequences. If you strike at this angle with this force, holding the stone this way, you get a sharper flake. If you don't, it crumbles. These patterns aren't just practical, they're neurological. Your brain is adapting to hold them. You're evolving, not just in body, but in cognition. And you're not alone. Others watch you, learn from you, copy you. Some fail, some improve. And when they do, something strange happens. You begin to remember not just your mistakes, but theirs. Your brain starts to track external memory, shared patterns, borrowed knowledge. Now it's not just your sharpness that matters, it's the sharpness of the group. This is where everything begins to accelerate. You explain without words. You demonstrate. A child mimics the twist of your wrist. An elder taps your elbow to correct your angle. Slowly, generation by generation, your memories begin to live outside your body, pass through gesture, through example, through repetition. Memory becomes portable. And with that, time itself begins to stretch. What once had to be relearned from scratch, every generation, every mistake is now retained, preserved, honed. Like a blade, memory becomes sharper with use. And not just factual memory, but procedural. The kind that lives in your fingers, your timing, your gut, muscle memory, spatial memory, pattern memory. You remember how a good flake feels before you even strike it. And because of this, your brain begins to reorganize. Areas once devoted to basic survival start taking on more abstract roles, managing sequences, storing visual spatial information, tracking causal logic. You don't know it, but the neural architecture that will one day solve math and compose symphonies is being carved by stone tools. Tool sharpening rewires your cognition. Because now every strike is a question, and every result is an answer. You begin to form hypotheses, test them, adjust. You notice cause and effect not just in the physical world but in yourself. Thought becomes recursive. Introspection blooms. You aren't just surviving anymore. You're understanding. But something even deeper is happening. When you pass on technique, when you teach someone where to find stone, how to break it, what not to do, you're doing more than ensuring survival. You're shaping identity. You're instilling memory that outlives your own. Your mind becomes a node in a much older system, one that began long before you and will continue long after. Culture. It starts here in this moment of teaching, in the transfer of technique, in the memory of edges. And the more you pass on, the more complex memory becomes. You begin to layer it, this tool for scraping hide, that one for cutting tendon, that one for woodworking. You begin to categorize ideas, different tools for different needs, and each one carries not just form, but a lineage of trials and improvements. Your stone blade holds not just your memory, but memories of others, memories of place, of hands, of attempts. It is, in a way, a library, a record, a timeline. You just don't call it that. You call it useful, you call it sharp, you call it necessary. And in the flick of the wrist, in the rhythm of flaking stone, in the muscle ache that follows, you feel it. That strange merging of memory and motion. That realization that to pass on a tool is to pass on a part of yourself. You remember. And because you remember, the future sharpens. One edge at a time. It begins, as most revolutions do, with something you don't fully understand. At first, fire is just terror, a sudden, angry light in the dark. It roars, consumes, dances like a predator made of air. You fear it rightly, but slowly you learn to control it, contain it, feed it. You learn to keep it alive not just as warmth or safety, but as something else entirely. Because one day you leave your stone too close to the flames, and something changes. The next time you strike it, it flakes easier, cleaner. The fracture isn't wild or jagged, it's obedient. And you don't know why, not in the way modern science might explain. You don't know about silica structures, internal water loss, or thermal thresholds. But you know this: fire made the stone better. Now everything you thought you knew, about sharpness, about control, about stone itself, begins to shift. You've just discovered heat treating. And with it, your world opens again. Where once you were limited by the brittleness of the raw material, you now have options. Stones that used to be stubborn now respond to your touch. Chert, jasper, even some quartzites, once difficult to shape, now flake like flint after careful heating. Suddenly, your toolkit isn't just sharper, it's deeper, broader, more refined. You're not just finding better materials, you're creating them. And that changes everything. Because now you're not just reacting to nature, you're modifying it. You're transforming the physical world through intention. You're not just an observer of natural forces. You're a collaborator, a manipulator, a kind of proto-engineer. Fire isn't just a gift, it's a tool. And that tool teaches you patience. You can't rush heat treatment. You learn to place the stone at just the right distance from the flames for just the right amount of time. Too hot and it fractures. Too cold and nothing changes. You start to listen to the crackle of bark, the color of embers. You read the fire like others read the sky. And something ancient shifts in you, a form of delayed gratification. Planning. Strategy not just in the hunt but in the forge. You realize fire is a teacher. It teaches you abstraction, the concept of change over time, that something hard can become soft, that something useless can become invaluable if treated with care. Your mind starts to map these transformations, to recognize potential not just in what is, but in what could be. It's alchemy, long before the word ever existed. And with each successful blade, fire earns your trust. You begin to incorporate it into ritual, into rhythm. Heat before flaking, fire then strike. A new order emerges, a sequence of transformation. You pass this down not with language but through repetition. Watch me. Do as I do. Feel the change in the stone. And the next generation learns to trust fire too. But something deeper burns beneath the surface. You realize that control over materials is a kind of control over the future. Fire makes you more than just a tool maker, it makes you a designer. You start to see possibilities in things you once ignored. Bones become handles. Resin becomes glue. Ash becomes polish. Every material speaks a new language after fire touches it. You begin to reimagine the world not as it is, but as it could be. And that leap from raw nature to altered matter is a cognitive explosion. It's not just fire that enters the chat. It's foresight. Fire gives you vision. It lets you imagine change before it happens, to plan not just for days but for outcomes, to sculpt not just the present but the conditions that shape the future. It's no longer enough to survive. Now you want precision. You want edges that obey, forms that last, tools that feel like an extension of your will. And you begin to build systems for that will, not just tools but techniques, standards, expectations. You separate good stone from bad. You grade your flakes. You select firewood based on how hot or how long it burns. Nothing is random anymore. You're not just living in the world. You're refining it. And with every flame, every reshaped edge, every careful hour near the embers, you send a message forward through time. We are not at the mercy of nature. We can change it. We can make it serve thought. And once fire answers the call of your tools, what else might it answer to? What else might bend beneath the will of a sharpened mind? That question glows quietly, just beneath the coals. You've made edges before, violent ones, born from impact, from fracture, from force. Sharpness created in a blink with the right strike at the right angle. But now, you sit with the stone longer. There is no shattering here, no sudden flake, no flash of brilliance. This is different. This is slow, deliberate erosion, a dance between surface and patience. You hold a harder stone, sandstone maybe, and press it against the blade, and you rub circles, strokes, again, again, again. At first it feels pointless. The edge dulls before it sharpens. You wonder if you're ruining the work, but then something begins to change. The shape refines. The surface smooths. The edge narrows, not just jagged and sharp, but polished, precise, resilient. This isn't about creating something fast. This is about making it last. Grinding stone isn't about force. It's about time. Time and commitment to a future that hasn't arrived yet. You could have used that same hour to hunt, to cook, to sleep. But instead, you sit with this tool, shaping it slowly. Because you've seen what happens when the edge chips too soon. When the blade snaps in the middle of a hunt. When the weapon fails and the world doesn't give second chances. And so you grind. You polish. You whisper to the tool with your fingers until it whispers back. This is where the ghost enters, not a spirit but an idea, that what you do now echoes forward, that this tool, sharpened slowly, might feed you 3 days from now, might protect a child from a charging boar, might outlive you. And in that thought, something radical takes hold. The future has entered your mind. You're not just solving problems in the present anymore. You're anticipating them. You're preventing them. This is long-term thinking, embedded in muscle and stone. The grindstone becomes your calendar. Each motion a promise to a tomorrow that isn't guaranteed. And the motions themselves start to evolve. You learn to vary the pressure. You switch directions. You feel the difference between wet grinding and dry. You discover that some stones polish better when soaked. Others leave dust that smooths edges faster. You don't write any of this down, but your hands remember. Your arms remember. The curve of your spine remembers the hours bent over stone. And those hours change you. Grinding teaches humility. It teaches that progress can be slow, invisible, and still worth everything. Because when the tool is done, when it shines like bone and slices like a whisper, you feel something strange. Pride, yes, but also reverence. This isn't just a weapon or a scraper. It's a vessel of effort, a monument to patience, a tool forged not in fire or fracture but in faith. You begin to see tools differently. Not just as things you make, but things you maintain. A good blade becomes a partner. You don't discard it, you restore it. You keep it sharp. You carry it longer than you carry most thoughts. Its edge mirrors your discipline. And so the grindstone becomes a quiet revolution. Because it changes your relationship with time, with energy, with meaning. It teaches that slowness can be strength, that permanence requires investment, that usefulness can be sculpted, not just struck into existence. And it spreads. Others see your tools, their shine, their longevity. They ask how. You show them, they copy you. And soon, polishing becomes part of the process, not an afterthought, a phase, a final step before pride. And with this, culture deepens again. Because now there's value in refinement, in doing something well, not just fast, not just hard, but right. Tools become more than disposable solutions. They become stories. You can tell who made what by the finish of the edge, the angle of the bevel, the texture left behind by the grinding stone. Each blade becomes a signature. And in this way, the past begins to speak again. Through polished surfaces, through worn grooves in sandstone, through the invisible hours pressed into every edge, ghosts, not of spirits, but of choices left behind by those who understood that the future was worth preparing for. So you keep grinding. Because even without words, without clocks, without any idea of tomorrow, as we name it today, you already understand something powerful. That the quality of a tool reflects the quality of the mind behind it. And your mind is learning to think in echoes. It starts with a tink, then a pause, then a sharper crack. A fragment falls perfectly curved. You pick it up, inspect the edge, and nod almost imperceptibly. Not quite right. You turn the core, adjust the angle, breathe in, and strike again. This time the sound changes, cleaner, more decisive. Another flake drops to the dust. This one gleams. You're not just striking rock, you're listening. Each tool begins with rhythm, not as melody, not as song, but as structure, like a heartbeat behind the task, a tempo that tells you when to stop and when to go harder, when to change position, when to trust the stone and when to shift your grip. And that sound, that cascade of tiny percussions, it becomes more than background noise. It becomes language. You don't have words for dorsal ridges or Hertzian cones or energy propagation, but you know when a stone rings true. You feel it through your fingertips and you hear it through your bones. A clean flake sounds different than a failed one. A sharp edge sings in a high, satisfying pitch. A poor strike is a flat note, a clumsy stutter in an otherwise elegant composition. You don't know it yet, but you're composing music in stone. And each session is a performance. Archaeologists in the far future will listen to recordings of knapping and know the difference between hesitation and mastery. They'll decode patterns from the tempo alone. Fast strikes with minimal pause mean a rhythm familiar and memorized. Slower movements reveal experimentation or reverence. They'll build entire maps of cognition based on sound. But for you, this isn't analysis. This is instinct. You listen to the feedback of stone. Each tink becomes instruction. Too hard, too soft, wrong platform, wrong angle, it all speaks through sound. The volume, the resonance, the timbre. You start to recognize the differences between flint and obsidian just by the crack alone. The pitch of the pop, the softness of the shatter. You don't just see quality, you hear it. And so the making of tools becomes an auditory ritual. A symphony played with antler, bone, and stone. Others begin to know you by your sound. The elders hear your napping across the camp and nod. They know you've improved, the cadence has matured. The children hear it and gather, not out of command but curiosity. They sit nearby, listening to the rhythm, absorbing without understanding. One day they'll mimic it, not just the strikes, but the silences in between. Because the space between sounds is as important as the sound itself. You wait, you assess, you strike, you pause. It's the breath between the notes that gives the song its shape. And this unspoken rhythm spreads. It becomes one of the earliest languages, not made of words but patterns. You don't write, but you remember, not through symbols on a page but sequences in sound. You recall how your teacher tapped twice before the final flake. You remember how a certain ping meant the core was almost exhausted. This music becomes memory, shared, preserved, evolving. In this way, you're not just making tools. You're participating in one of the earliest human art forms. Because sound precedes language, it precedes story. It's how we understood the world before we could describe it. The napping rhythm is a proto-song, a way to signal mastery, to encode memory, to transfer knowledge across time. You don't sing, but your hands do. And their music leaves a record. Each flake scattered on the ground, each scar on the core, each polished edge, they're the notes that remain after the melody ends. A stone tool scatter isn't just debris, it's sheet music. It holds the tempo of your thoughts, the cadence of your learning. A future archaeologist will sit in silence and reconstruct the rhythm, listening for the echo of your hands. And that rhythm still speaks. Thousands of years later, someone will pick up the broken flakes and hear it. The quiet sound of intelligence, not just surviving but shaping, not just reacting but refining. They'll hear the pattern and realize this wasn't random. This was deliberate. This was human. And so the sound of napping becomes a kind of immortality. You may not leave behind stories carved in bone or paintings on cave walls, but you leave this, the choreography of effort, the music of making, a sound that says, I was here, I thought, I changed the world around me. And in that sound, in that final tink, the next chapter waits to begin. You've been told a story, one where men strike the stone, hunt the mammoth, invent the tools, and drag progress forward with grit-stained hands. But something been left out. Not hidden maliciously, perhaps just quietly ignored. Forgotten in the dust of excavation and the assumptions of modern minds. But the flint doesn't lie. The bones don't lie. And the story they whisper is different. Because not all toolmakers were men. You sit at the edge of a fire. You're young, not a warrior, not a chieftain, but your hands are already shaped by work. Beside you sits someone older, your mother, your aunt, your grandmother. Her fingers are calloused, her forearms corded with precision. She holds a blade she knapped herself. She sharpens it with practiced grace. And she teaches you not through lectures, but through action, through repetition, through the rhythm of knapping, through a legacy passed not by dominance, but by devotion. This is a technology of care as much as survival. Anthropologists, peering through time, now see the faint fingerprints, literal and figurative, of women on the tools we once assumed were solely male-made. They find wear patterns that suggest different grips, different tasks. They analyze skeletal remains with muscular development not shaped by grinding grain or gathering berries, but by shaping stone, crafting hide, constructing shelters. The story expands. You are not just watching cavemen. You are watching a distributed intelligence across gender, across generation. In many societies, women likely managed the flow of raw materials. They knew which outcrops yielded the best chert. They remembered the seasonal paths to Obsidian. They were logistics experts, mediators, coordinators. They didn't always wield the spear, but they may have designed its head. And when a flake pattern changed or a refinement was made, they were the ones to notice and to teach. You're taught not to see the sharpest edge, but the most enduring one. You learn that utility isn't always in lethality. Sometimes it's in the balance of a knife used to skin, not stab. Sometimes it's in a scraping tool designed for both efficiency and preservation of hide. These aren't the hero tools of ancient epics. They're the invisible foundations of survival. And they may well have been created by hands dismissed as too delicate, too passive, too soft, until you look closer. Because stone remembers the touch. And when you stop assuming what those hands must have looked like, the picture changes. The group isn't led by brute force, but by wisdom shared in circles, mothers showing daughters, grandmothers correcting technique, younger girls experimenting on discarded cores, boys watching, learning, joining. There's no single genius, no lone inventor. There's a we. It's not that women were also making tools. It's that they were core to the continuity of technology itself, especially as knowledge spread not through writing, but through observation, demonstration, memory. Who better to preserve that chain than those embedded in the rhythm of life, of tending, crafting, healing? Imagine the first fire-hardened wooden shaft, smoothed and straightened not in a moment of conquest, but in quiet preparation for a journey. Picture the first hide scraper reshaped not in a battle frenzy, but in the patient dusk before winter. Consider that the refinements of edge and handle may have emerged not from domination, but from need. The need to carry a child, to butcher food, to mend a cut with care. You see now that intelligence wasn't male or female. It was communal. And that's the part so often erased, not just the presence of women, but the presence of shared minds. It wasn't the brilliance of one that made stone tools possible. It was the iteration of many, the conversation across generations, the feedback loop between teaching and learning, failing and refining. And when you understand that, you realize this chapter isn't about gender. It's about scale. The real story of early technology isn't the solitary napper. It's the camp full of watchers. It's the mother passing her technique to a niece. It's the collaboration, the borrowing, the distributed cognition across a village. Intelligence wasn't isolated in strength or status, it was networked. And that network had women at every node. So the tools you hold, the hand axe, the flake, the pressure-flaked spear point, they're not just the products of masculine will. They're the artifacts of a collective brain, a civilization not yet named but already forming. And it's time to remember that, to see the fingerprints not just as impressions but as signatures. Because this sharpness, this miracle of stone into survival, didn't come from brute force alone. It came from attention, from patience, from hands that shaped tools while also shaping lives. And those hands, they were many, they were wise, and they were not forgotten by the stone, only by the stories we chose to tell. Until now. And just as you begin to see the past more clearly, another question emerges, one you can't quite answer yet. If women helped shape the foundations of technology, how else did they shape the future? What other innovations hide in the folds of forgotten memory? You feel the edge of that question, like a blade waiting to be drawn. And the next chapter is already waiting. You wake up in a world filled with edges, smooth, polished, mass-produced, knives with stainless blades, scissors with laser-cut teeth, machinery built by machines. You hold a phone in your hand, its surface of glass shaped with subatomic precision. You don't think about how it came to be. You don't have to. But once, not so long ago, in the scale of human time, sharpness wasn't something you bought. It was something you earned. And now, most of that knowledge is gone. It didn't vanish all at once. The collapse came slowly, quietly, a little at a time, first copper, then bronze, then iron, each discovery a miracle, each new alloy a shortcut. Suddenly, stone became a relic, a symbol of backwardness. The cutting edge moved forward and left its ancestors buried beneath it. You didn't notice what was lost, because you never had to sharpen your world with your hands. But if everything fell tomorrow, if factories stopped, supply chains snapped, and technology stuttered to a halt, could you shape survival from the raw earth? Could you sit down beside a river, pick up a rock, and turn it into something that cuts, scrapes, protects? Chances are you couldn't. Because we didn't just stop using stone, we stopped remembering how. Today, only a handful of people alive can replicate Paleolithic tools from scratch without modern equipment. They are flint knappers, experimental archaeologists, and indigenous keepers of memory. They study stone not with textbooks but with scars. They listen to fracture patterns like a lost language. They fail over and over until their hands relearn what their minds forgot. You watch one of them, her fingers wrapped in tape, eyes narrowed in concentration. She doesn't smash the rock. She negotiates with it. She knows just how to strike, just where to press, how to shape without breaking. Each flake she removes is a sentence in an ancient dialect of force and angle. She doesn't speak the language. She embodies it. But even she admits there are things she doesn't know. Secrets lost in the silence between eras. Tools that archaeologists unearth but cannot explain. Cut marks on bone too clean to match modern replications. Cores shaped in ways we don't fully understand. Was it a technique? A material we no longer recognize? Or simply a way of thinking we can't access anymore? Stone tools weren't just primitive knives. They were repositories of logic, embodied blueprints, muscle-coded algorithms passed down through generations. And when metal arrived, those neural pathways began to atrophy. We didn't just stop making tools, we stopped teaching the way to make them. You don't forget in one generation. It takes time. A few children skip the lesson. A few elders die before passing it on. A few people decide it's easier to melt copper than to knap flint. Eventually, what was once common knowledge becomes specialist knowledge, then mythology, then nothing. And yet part of you knows something important slipped through your fingers. Because in chasing progress, you also abandoned resilience. The Stone Age wasn't inferior. It was robust. It required no factories, no electricity, no infrastructure beyond the earth and your own ingenuity. It was distributed intelligence at its most basic. If you had the knowledge, you could survive almost anywhere. Now you're surrounded by tools, but you're helpless without them. You've gained power but lost self-sufficiency. And maybe you've lost a little awe too, because when everything is easy, nothing feels sacred. When blades come from boxes instead of bodies, you stop appreciating the miracle of sharpness. The ancient people didn't have that luxury. Every flake they shaped reminded them of mortality. Every tool was an act of defiance against a world trying to kill them. And so, every edge mattered. Every moment of craftsmanship was also a moment of survival. Now, you press a button and order 10 knives for delivery. But if that button stopped working, would you know how to hold a hammer stone, how to select the right core, how to read the grain of chert like a story waiting to be told? Or would you sit there, surrounded by silence and useless stone? This isn't nostalgia, it's a reckoning. Because knowledge that lives only in books is brittle. It breaks when no one uses it. Real skill must pass through hands across skin over generations. And when that chain is broken, the wisdom doesn't vanish. It fades. Fades into museum exhibits, academic jargon, lost potential. And yet the stone still waits. It hasn't forgotten how to break. The earth still holds its secrets, patient and unmoving. The raw materials are all around you. The question isn't whether stone tools can be made again. The question is whether you can learn to make them again. And in asking that, you begin to feel something ancient stir inside you. A faint memory not in your mind but in your muscles. A ghost of instinct. A challenge. Because if tomorrow crumbles, if the grid dies, if the cities fall, then stone won't just be history. It will be your only hope. And in that future, you'll have to remember what the world forgot. But before that happens, you still have time. Time to look back, not just in mourning but in curiosity. To trace the sharp edge of memory before it's gone. And maybe, just maybe, to pick up a stone. Because the final chapter isn't written yet, but it's coming. You watch as a modern hand picks up a chunk of flint, the same kind of stone you once turned into knives, scrapers, arrowheads, but this hand trembles, the fingers fumble, the strike is all wrong. A dull clack, then silence. The rock cracks, but not the way it's supposed to. No clean flake, no sharp edge, just the frustrated face of someone trying to remember something they were never taught. This is the moment it hits you. You, the so-called caveman, were the master. They laugh at your simplicity, your primitive tools, your lack of progress. But now they're trying to do what you once did without thinking, and they're failing. Because this isn't about brute force. It's not about smashing rocks. It's about understanding stone, pressure, memory. And you had that. You earned it through 1,000 failures and 1,000,000 years of refinement passed through calloused hands. The irony is sharp. They build satellites and split atoms. But if you drop them into the wilderness with nothing, no knife, no fire, no food, who would survive longer? The engineer or the hunter-gatherer? The coder or the stone shaper? You already know the answer. Because you didn't just use stone. You lived with it. You knew its moods, its voices. You spoke the language of fracture and edge long before there was writing. And now that language is being translated back clumsily, desperately, by people who realize just how fragile modern knowledge really is. There are those trying to rebuild it. Survivalists, flint knappers, experimental archaeologists. They sit in forests and deserts not to cosplay the past but to resurrect it. They study old flakes, mimic strike patterns, scrape hides with blades they've made themselves. They aren't trying to romanticize you. They're trying to remember you. And not just you, your mind. Because the edge you created wasn't just physical, it was intellectual. To shape a tool from nothing but earth and instinct requires abstraction, planning, foresight, the beginnings of science. You were solving engineering problems without knowing the word engineering. You were testing materials, adjusting pressure, predicting outcomes. And now, that thinking has to be relearned. You watch as a modern human crouches beside a stone core. This time their strike is better. A sliver peels off, not perfect but sharp. The person smiles. Something clicks. Not just the flake but something deeper. A connection. You see the same look you once had when the first flake broke clean. It's not pride. It's recognition. This is how it begins again. Not with textbooks, not with diagrams, but with bodies and dirt and time, with scars on fingertips and hours spent failing. And in those failures, something awakens, a kind of humility, the kind that only comes when you try to survive without the world holding your hand. Because real survival doesn't start with tools. It starts with nothing. And from that nothing, you learn to make edge. You turned the unshaped world into a toolkit. You didn't just make tools, you made the conditions for civilization. Without you, there would be no axes to cut forests, no knives to butcher meat, no points to hunt from afar. You were the first engineer, the first material scientist, the first artist. And now, as your memory fades, others are realizing how badly they need you. Not just your skills, your mindset, your patience, your capacity to look at a rock and see possibility. Because that mindset doesn't just build knives, it rebuilds worlds. Could we survive without you? Probably not. But the better question is, can we learn from you? That answer is still being written in backyards, in wild places, in the quiet moments where someone picks up a stone and asks, how did they do it? And then, more importantly, can I do it too? And the truth is yes, but only if we stop pretending that stone is beneath us. Only if we accept that sharpness is earned, not bought. Only if we understand that every blade, no matter how modern, is built on your legacy. Because the edge didn't begin with steel. It began with you sitting cross-legged beside a stream, hammerstone in hand, testing, adjusting, learning. And now, centuries later, we return to that stream, humbled, curious, ready to rebuild the edge from nothing. And maybe, just maybe, to remember what it means to survive. You crouch in the dirt the same way your ancestors did for thousands of years. A stone in your left hand, a hammerstone in your right. You're not thinking in words, not exactly. There's no grammar here, no script, just motion, anticipation. A quiet internal geometry. You tilt the core, you strike. And as the flake peels off, something else emerges, not just a blade, but a thought. You don't know it yet, but you're building more than tools. You're building a mind. Modern neuroscience has only recently caught up to what your body always knew. When you knap flint, when you calculate angles, remember sequences, feel the resistance of stone beneath your fingertips, you're activating some of the same regions your descendants will use to speak, to imagine, to plan. Areas like Broca's region, once thought to be strictly for language, light up during tool making. It's as if words and blades were born from the same ancestral spark. But how could that be? Because both demand structure, both require foresight. Language isn't just about sound, it's about sequence, intention, memory, just like shaping stone. To strike a flake, you must imagine its future before it exists. To speak a sentence, you must hold meaning in your mind and shape sound into form. Both are acts of abstraction, and abstraction is the beginning of everything. When you knap, you engage working memory, the ability to juggle ideas in real time. You engage motor control, precision down to fractions of a second. You engage visual spatial reasoning, predicting how a fracture will travel through a medium older than you. And you engage something else too, patience. The brain doesn't just grow from stimuli, it grows from frustration, from trying, failing, adjusting. Every broken flake becomes a lesson. Every scar becomes a map. Somewhere in your lineage, this pattern hardened. Not in bone, but in thought. The more you refined your tools, the more your brain refined itself. The cortex expanded. Neural connections strengthened. You didn't just survive, you got smarter, slowly, generationally. The tool changed the brain, and the brain changed the tool. A feedback loop, a spiral. Technology didn't just help humans evolve, it became the engine of evolution itself. And what's more, you passed it on. Not just the object, but the method. Technique transmitted through mimicry, through observation, through gesture long before there were words. This was communication before language, hands shaping knowledge into stone, eyes watching, minds adapting. A culture of cognition built not on ideology but on edge control. Every tool was a textbook, every strike a sentence. Think about what that means. It wasn't war or agriculture or even fire that first rewired the human brain. It was the practice of shaping matter with intention. That is the real legacy of the Stone Age. Not crude tools, but cognitive scaffolding. You made your world more functional, and in doing so, made your mind more capable. And we still carry that within us. Today, when a child learns to hold a pencil or tap a touchscreen or assemble a puzzle, they're reenacting the same mental choreography you once did with stone. When an engineer sketches a design, or a coder thinks recursively, or a surgeon makes a precise incision, they're echoing your mental blueprint. Not directly, but deeply. Because cognition didn't begin in classrooms. It began in contact. Skin on stone, intention into impact. And what if we've forgotten that? What if our disconnection from tools, from making, from shaping, from crafting, has dulled something in us? What if sharpness, once earned through effort, is now taken for granted, and with it, a piece of how we think? A modern mind is agile in abstract ways, language, numbers, algorithms. But can it build from scratch? Can it improvise with the materials at hand? Your mind could. Because yours was a maker's brain. Not only did you wield cognition, you honed it. With every cut, with every edge, you trained your mind to focus, adapt, and teach. You didn't just inherit intelligence. You created it. And we are still living inside that creation. So the next time someone calls your world primitive, let them hold the stone. Let them try to break it the right way. Let them feel the flicker of frustration, the whisper of learning, the moment when precision meets patience. Then they'll understand. You weren't just surviving. You were sculpting consciousness. And you still are. You've been called primitive, as if that word could hold the weight of your choices, your trials, your mind. As if breaking stone with intention were somehow less than writing a codebase or launching a satellite. But they forget something. Something sharp, buried beneath the centuries. They forget that you were the first to choose how to change the world, not just if you would survive it. Because every blade you made was more than a tool. It was a turning point. You crouched in silence, not ignorance. You weren't lost. You were precise. Each flake you removed carried a thought, not in language maybe, but in logic. You knew what would work and what would break. You felt it before you could explain it. And that knowing, that tactile thinking, set something in motion we've never stopped riding. Civilization didn't begin with a written law or a plowed field. It began with a decision. This stone struck this way for this reason. You shaped matter. You shaped time. You shaped meaning. And meaning is all culture really is. Now, thousands of years later, we stand on the far side of your edge. We've built silicon from sand, satellites from metal, virtual realities from light. But the core question, the one you asked with every strike of your hammerstone, still lingers. How do we survive by shaping the world? Today, we shape with abstraction. We outsource skill to machines, memory to servers, knowledge to algorithms. We live far from the stone now, far from the grind, the rhythm, the risk of getting it wrong with your bare hands. We've insulated ourselves from failure, and with it, maybe, just maybe, from the raw intelligence born through struggle. Because you didn't get smarter by consuming. You got smarter by trying. By choosing the wrong flake, watching it snap off-center and understanding why. By slicing your palm not because you were careless, but because precision isn't free. You paid for it in blood, time, patience. And that payment became memory, became culture, became mind. So what happens if it all breaks? If the servers go dark, if the supply chains vanish, If the things we think make us modern, electricity, networks, machines, crumble in a blink, could we go back? Could you go back? Could you read the land? Find the right stone? Know its grain, its mood, its potential? Could you kneel in the dirt, angle a strike just so, and create something with nothing but instinct and endurance? Because you did it once, all of us did. Somewhere in your ancestry, not metaphorically, but literally, someone knelt with a rock and split it right. Someone shaped sharpness out of chaos. And that act rippled forward, generation after generation, until it reached you. That's the secret no textbook will tell you. We didn't climb out of caves because we were lucky. We did it because we were clever. Because sharpness isn't just about stone. It's about insight. It's about making sense of the unshaped. Every phone in your pocket, every skyscraper on your skyline, every breakthrough we claim as modern, all of it is just the stone scaled up, the edge extended forward. The mind that once chipped at Flint now chips at code, at atoms, at stars. But the essence is unchanged. Where is the pattern? What breaks cleanly? What makes this world more livable, more knowable, more ours? That's what you were doing back then. Not surviving. Inventing. We tell ourselves stories about progress. Linear ones, clean ones, but the truth is messier, more circular. Sometimes to move forward we have to remember how we began. We have to feel the weight of the stone in our hand and ask, would I know what to do now? Would I have the patience, the nerve, the mind? Because sharpness dulls, civilizations forget. But somewhere inside you, buried beneath passwords and pixels, the edge still waits. The edge that taught us how to think. The edge that carved out fire, shelter, language, memory. The edge that turned survival into a story worth telling. And maybe someday, when the world is quiet again and the future uncertain, someone will pick up a stone, not out of nostalgia, out of necessity. And in that moment, strike by strike, the human story will begin again. Sharper, stronger, still alive.